We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Our special guest today is Lisa Bodell, a global leader on simplification, collaboration, and innovation. Lisa shows organizations how to eliminate complexity and leverage simplicity, unleashing creativity and sparking the energy so essential to innovate and compete in a rapidly changing world. She founded FutureThink in 2003 and works with leading brands worldwide. Lisa's the author of 2 groundbreaking books, Why Simple Wins, Escape the Complexity Trap and Get to Work That Matters, and Kill the Company, End the Status Quo, Start an Innovation Revolution. She ranks on a list of the top 50 speakers worldwide and captivates audiences with her energy and humor. Lisa is a teacher, professor, and TED Talk speaker on innovation and serves on several boards. What I appreciate most about you, Lisa, is your effective ability to make a case for something so essential, simplicity. Welcome to R.O.G, Lisa.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here and can't wait to dig into this topic. Before we do, tell our listeners a little bit about your background.
Let's see. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm in New York now, but I grew up in Michigan and then in Chicago. So I'm a Midwestern person and I'm very practical and grounded as a result of that. So that's probably why I'm so attracted to simplicity. But I think it was my career journey that really led me to it. I've always been a very creative thinker but with a business mind. And so, back then, this was in the 80s, I went into advertising, right? Because that was like creative business. And I was always really good at the creative parts. I was friends with the creative teams, but my account people told me to stay in my lane, and I said, how much potential are we missing if we're only letting one group of people be in charge of ideas? How much potential are we missing in terms of being able to break through on things? So eventually I left, I went to a .com and then I went out on my own and I realized I was a good teacher. And my job was how do I teach people to reach their potential when so much of it during our workday is squashed by putting us back in a box? And so I launched a training company around innovation and creativity, but also simplicity, because what I realized with most people is they have great ideas. They can't get to them because they are drowning in work, and it's only become worse. So I would tell you that simplicity is probably the biggest thing we train on now, because people, they are scarce on time. And as a result of that, they are scarce on energy, and we've got to help them get it back.
Absolutely. What are they busy doing?
The work of work. That's the problem. When you ask people, and I do this when I talk, I'll ask people in an audience when I'm giving a speech, what do you spend your day doing? And the number 2 things, no matter where I am globally, or the level of people, or the type of company, their answers are meetings and emails.
Meetings and emails all day, every day.
All day, every day. And what's really interesting about that is, you have to have meetings and emails. But what you need to look at is how much of that is unnecessary. So, there's always going to be complexity. There's always going to be the work of work. But what we're talking about isn't the necessary. We're talking about the unnecessary. And we don't give people enough license to challenge how we work. We almost think it's beneath us, right? Because people should know how to run a meeting, or they should know how to do an email, or they should know how to make better decisions. Well, they don't, because they're scared. A lot of it is driven by fear. And a lot of it is because we don't communicate what we want, or that we're allowed to get rid of things. So there's a lot of cultural changes that I focus on that turn our perceptions at work on their head. And that's exciting for me.
Yeah, very exciting. And I also think people haven't seen it modeled well. Like,
No.
When were you at a meeting that was run really well?
Well, I actually laugh at people. I say, that's where you spend your time, is in meetings and emails. But how many people here raise their hand were hired for their amazing meeting abilities?
Yeah.
No one.
Or have ever looked into how to be better, right?
Well, because they think they should know how, but it's also, it's not so much the what, like how often you schedule a meeting, it's the why. It's the, it's the behaviors of, first of all, it's too easy to schedule them.
Yeah.
And we use them as safety nets or CYAs, and it's too easy to waste people's time. So I think that's something we need to really be cognizant of what is really meaningful work. And everything that we do in terms of what we say yes to or no to has to be in service of that meaningful work. And until we as leaders define what that is, people just go through the motions. They execute their calendar. And that to them is value. And the problem with so many companies is that's not value. I don't care how many meetings you have. So it doesn't matter how much you get done if what you're doing doesn't matter. And we help them think about what matters. That's really what it comes down to with simplicity. What is valuable? Spend your time on that.
And how do you help teams and leaders? Like, where would you start?
Well, defining it is one thing, and then modeling the behavior to what you said is another. So one thing we do is I'll ask a leader, do your teams, or do you reward them for valuable work? Oh, yeah, that's what we want is valuable work. Where do they spend most of their time? Oh, God, they just drown in meetings. So are they spending it on meaningful work? No. How do you define meaningful work? 7 sentences all over the place. I said, okay, let's talk about what do you spend, write down the tasks with your team, the 20 tasks, because it's hard, that you spend your day doing, and they write them down. And then I said, with your team, circle the ones that are valuable. They circle very few of them.
Wow.
And I say, because it's meetings, emails, whatever. And then I say, great, okay, so can you get rid of any of these things? Because then they realize how they spend this psychological torture with themselves around I can't get rid of that. I can't. Well, you've got to get rid of something, because now we want to define what meaningful work is. So what do you wish you were spending your time on?
Yeah.
Being with clients, thinking, being able to come up with innovative ideas. And what they find is, first of all, doing that is defining meaningful work. And the other epiphany is when you look at what you spend your day doing, it tends to be internal. And what you want to spend your day doing instead is external. So there's a shift that they all of a sudden realize, and they start talking about what do we do now to redistribute our time? Yeah. And they come up with a collective definition of what meaningful work is. And that's great. That's important.
I love that. How do you redistribute your time? And be really intentional about that. And now what would happen if someone gets this message and is all in, but they're in an organization or a part of a team that isn't?
Right.
What coaching
that's the number one question I get, which is, yeah, but you don't know my boss. What do I do?
Yeah, right. Culturally, this is not how we operate.
When I ask people if they could get their time back or if any of their time is wasted, the answer is yes. And when I start to probe on what could they get rid of, the answer is no. And so we get to fear, obligation, and we also get to, stop banging your head against a wall. Let's stop focusing on sphere of influence stuff, like changing government regulations or your organizational structure or your travel policy. It's not going to happen. Why don't we instead worry about the things that are in our control and pilot those behavior changes? So if it's at work, let's change the frequency of a meeting, or let's eliminate a report for 3 months and see if we miss it. And if it's personal, you know what? Maybe you should start putting more boundaries down. You don't need to do that extra volunteer thing at school because it's really not adding value. It's busy. Or, maybe you don't need to be part of that carpool because the way that carpool's run actually it's hell. So let's take control of our own time and realize that that's more valuable.
So good. What I'm hearing you say reminds me of how you've described reversing assumptions.
Yeah.
So could you tell our listeners how you reverse assumptions?
Well, reversing assumptions is kind of an improv trick. And what that means is the bigger picture is we don't allow people to challenge how we work. And there are many things that were put in place long ago that have outlived their time. And for us to progress, we need to get rid of them and put in new things, or not put them in at all. And the only way you're going to do that is to challenge your assumptions around work. So there's a couple things that we do. We have a technique called Kill a Stupid Rule. And that is where we have all the rules and time sucks that people put up on a board. And we say, why are these a problem? One is called Kill a Stupid Rule. And what this does is it basically allows people to list all their time sucks and annoyances and rules that they think are holding them back. And they look at them one by one and say, are these really necessary? Do we agree as a group that we could get rid of them? or change the frequency or change how we do them. So it's a structured way and a safe place for allowing people to use subtraction at work. Because they only think that they're valuable if they're doing addition, but subtraction is just as important.
Absolutely.
And the other thing about reversing assumptions is, and I've got a good story that I could tell you about it.
Yeah, please.
That we forget, we kind of fall into behavior. And I'll tell you a good story. So I was once doing a session with a bunch of scientists in Germany, and they told me that they have a real problem with their culture because everyone just follows the rules. And I was reminded of a story about scientists that did an experiment with a monkey. And here's how it went. There was a scientist that decided to experiment with monkeys. And what he did is he put 10 monkeys in a cage. And he decided that each day he would put a banana on top of the cage. And he would let the monkeys fight to get it. And the monkey that got the banana could eat it, but all the other monkeys he would pour a bucket of water on. And so the first day he did this, he lets a monkey get the banana, and all the other monkeys, he pours a big bucket on, and they start screeching and they're mad. And this happens every single day. Someone gets the banana, he pours a bucket, they're screeching and they're mad. And by the end of the week, no monkey is trying to get that banana because they know the penalty. So he decides to change the experiment. He doesn't give up. He says, I'm going to swap out one monkey each week and put a new one in. And see if that changes the dynamic. So sure enough, the next week, he takes an old monkey out, he puts a new monkey in. What's the first thing the new monkey does? Goes for the banana, and all the monkey pulls it back down. Don't do that. Every day, same thing. And by the end of the week, that monkey knows, I guess I better not touch that banana. And then in 10 weeks, when there's 10 new monkeys in the cage, no monkey ever tries to go for the banana, but none of them know why. And this is what happens at work, right? Someone must have put that rule in place for a reason. There must be a reason why nobody's going for the banana. We don't challenge work. And until we as leaders or as role models at home start teaching people that it's okay to be curious, to ask questions, that that's a positive trait, nothing will change. And I think that's a valuable lesson.
I do too. That's so relatable, sadly, and a great anecdote for us to recognize, in our own world, like what is the equivalent of that banana? What are the rules? I like how you call them rules that we live by, and let's challenge our assumptions about them.
Yeah. And the thing that gets people upset, it's both personally, what if it affects me with my friends or my kids at school or whatever, or professionally, what if my boss gets mad, I don't get a raise? The idea is to do it collectively, right? Challenge them collectively, or stick in your sphere of control. What are daily things that you do that you can pilot getting rid of? We've got to get out of this black and white thinking that everything has to have dire consequences and can never be changed back. It can.
Absolutely. And you believe that simplification is the route to innovation. Tell us more about that.
Well, it is because, again, ideas aren't the problem. People have lots of ideas, but they don't have time to think. Thinking has become a daring act within organizations, but in our culture, because we are part of the cult of busy, right? I'm busier than you. You want to be busier than me. Oh, so busy. And a lot of people, when they're not busy, they're uncomfortable. They don't know what to do because they've forgotten how. But at work, how that translates is, busy, we equate busy with value. And we're really just executing our calendar. We're not really moving forward. And so what we want to be able to do is simplify to create the space for thinking to happen. The ideal organization or person to me is someone who is proud to say, I took time to think, because you're going to come up with better ideas. And they're not hiding it on their calendar. That's a big cultural thing at companies. If they have to sneak it on their calendar or put a fake meeting on the calendar to think, there are a lot of organizations now that are mandating thinking time, deep work. And I do it at my company. Everyone on my team has to put on their calendar half a day for deep work. And if they don't use it, that's on them. That's their issue. So it's about how do you help people put boundaries down on what's important so you can get to that meaningful work or stuff for your life.
Absolutely. And what is the frequency of those half-day time blocks?
Once a week.
Once a week.
Once a week. And again, maybe at your office, it's once a month, or maybe it's meeting free Fridays, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's, if you're at home, right, with kids or whatever you're doing, you're going to take an hour every morning. I mean, but it's you carving out that time, which is easier said than done. But I think
Mm-hmm.
it's, time's a non-renewable resource. It's time we start putting boundaries down and be more, it's not being selfish, it's being protective. And there's a difference.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And just on that topic of selfishness, generosity, I mean, how do you define generosity?
Well, so for me, the way that I live that is my goal with having a training company is to help people reach their potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to invest my time to help them achieve what's meaningful. And that's what we do. And I do a lot of work with the government, and I do a lot of work in nonprofits for free to help them. I also do a lot with schools, and I volunteer my time because I think that, money's one thing. And if you have it, it's easy, right? Oh, I gave money but what, to me, the real value of something is when you give your time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I define it, is how do you give your time to help people do stuff? Because it's kind of like, you can get a self-help book, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have somebody that spends time with you and shows you the behaviors, that's, in my opinion, more valuable.
Absolutely.
So that's how I view it.
I've heard somebody say, how do you spell love? Time.
I love it.
Yeah, it's very much what you're saying. And it is a generous thing. And I think your point about securing time to think and being diligent about that is the opposite of selfish. It's the way for you to generate your ideas, put them into practice, solve problems, really give yourself the time to think. And you're right. We think that it's a luxury, and we tend to congratulate people or think that those who are so busy are so important. And I think there's
It's a
like
badge of
a
honor.
shift, a badge of honor, right?
Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah.
So, and we're trying to change that. We are, because everyone wants it, but it's also a cultural shift, right? It's easy to say, but my joke is, if you went into someone's office and all you did was see them staring out the window all the time, you'd be like, well, they must not be very important. They're not working.
Yeah. Right. Right. And if they openly admit it, I'm just thinking,
yeah, I'm just thinking, and that's fine. I mean, let me be clear, because I run a business, right? And my job, I'm not a nonprofit. I'm here to make money, and I want my team to work. I want them to get things done. But what I don't want is how they work to get in the way of what I hired them to do.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's not selfish to take back your time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I've heard you talk about, like, the thing you're talking about now is like doing overthinking, and how can we get out of that trap? Part of it is our own belief system. Part of it is what we're rewarded for and recognize, and expectations. So how do we, turn that back around? Another thing you talk about is managing, not leading.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
Sure. That's what happens when we're busy, is that we are, I like to say, you can get stuff done on your to-do list. You can execute your calendar. That's being busy. That's managing time. But leading is driving you forward, right? So if you get done at the end of the day and all you did was execute your calendar, that's okay if the things on it were meaningful. And I think, there's a big difference, I like to say, between being in a groove and being in a rut, and they feel the same. So we've got to remember, busy isn't necessarily impactful. And similarly, this is important for people at work, being organized isn't being simplified. So a lot of people they manage processes. Everything's in place. Look, it's working. But nothing is perfect. There's always going to be the unplanned and unnecessary. But how do you lead if you're just doing the same thing over and over again? That's not leading. So I think that we've got to get out of this, all these productivity gurus and efficiency gurus. And, you can't spreadsheet your way out of it at some point.
So part of it is just saying what I'm not doing, right? Like, I'm going to be thoughtful about what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. So yes, managing is managing a list of tasks. Leading is knowing which ones are important. And so that's why we have to build subtraction into our operating system. And that involves questioning work and getting rid of. So, I mean, there are companies now that are rewarding people for eliminating things.
And that, right? I mean, to me, it's,
Yeah.
we always go, but at the same time, why shouldn't we? I mean, that just is so dumb. I do a kill a stupid rule session with my team every quarter.
Okay.
And how you know it's working is when two things. One, when the leader role models it, because most of the rules that they always are going to list are mine that are stupid. And I create them with the best of intentions.
Sure.
And the leader says, you're right, let's get rid of them. And I always do. I always role model it. And then the next thing is that every time we do it, every quarter, it gets harder for them to list rules because we've gotten rid of so many.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a sign of progress. Well, what would you say to a team whose leader is not that vulnerable and doesn't think that should be killed?
It's going to be harder, because at the end of the day, if the leader doesn't do it, people don't leave jobs, they leave people. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going to happen. So you're going to look at their retention numbers and the culture is going to be in the crapper and all that kind of stuff. So there'll be indicators, but because at some point it's not, people aren't whining anymore. It's the boss. But I would say that if the boss is the problem, there's a couple of things you can do. One, you can recraft it, the argument to say, this isn't about getting rules. This is about how can we be more efficient and productive? I mean, you're going to get to the same answer, but if they want to hear it like squeezing more blood from a stone, then so be it. Whatever. Stop. Don't hit your head against the wall. Just do it. Yeah. And then the other thing is giving them a safety net, which is tell the boss, if we're going to get rid of something, let's pilot getting rid of it. Let's just test it. And if you don't like it, we can bring it back. So the risk becomes lower, because what you're telling me is if a boss wants to keep doing the same thing over and over and not get rid of anything, there's fear.
Yeah.
And we're going to take away the fear.
For sure. I remember early in my career, I was responsible for writing this report that was very data heavy, not my area of expertise. And I didn't understand the purpose of like who was using it and what was it necessary for. So I remember at one point I just stopped doing it to see if anybody would notice, and no one noticed. And then at one point, I remember like 6 months later, I brought it up to my boss, and just because I thought at that point it might be kind of funny. And he was like, oh, I didn't even realize that you weren't doing that anymore. But it was this thing that just drove me nuts every week. It sucked the energy out of me. So I just stopped doing it. I mean, do you recommend that people do that?
Yeah, but if that's actually something that does happen. And I actually talk about this in my book, which is some people admit, they're like, look, when left to my resources, I'm just going to have to take matters into my own hands, right? The sphere of control. And so that is one way that it happens is people get, it's kind of like being passive aggressive about it. Do you know what I mean? It's not because you're left to no other choice.
Right.
And so they get rid of things to prove a point. And because then they can go back to the boss with data and say, I think we're okay. Hey, good news. You know what? You had a great report. You got to frame it. But I think I found a way that we don't need it and we're just fine over here. So, hey.
Yeah. So you still get that security of having it somewhere. Yeah. And I think that your approach of being more overt about it, saying what are some of the rules that exist that we could kill and what could we do in its place? And I like the idea of the pilot.
Well, if you're not overt, it's going to come out passive aggressively. Or aggressively, they'll quit.
Right. Yeah, they'll just leave. Absolutely. So when people are hearing this and they're thinking about their own, like when you talked about the difference between organization and simplification, give me an example of what you mean by how we would simplify, how we operate, and in the ways that we structure our operation.
In terms of how we simplify?
Yeah.
So there's a few things. I mean, I think that, first of all, simplicity should be a strategy, right? It's a principle. It's a way that we work. So people are, they are empowered. You communicate what meaningful work is. You are empowered to do it. And in fact, you are ideally reviewed on it and your performance and rewarded for it. So that's part of the structure that happens. And you do a couple things. You let people within their teams, their sphere of control, handle their own day-to-day work. But you also have a group within an organization, or you can be your own CEO or chief simplification officer, that are in charge of the processes that affect more than one group, right? The across, the between and beyond stuff. Those are your travel policies, your HR policies, your IT systems, your procurement. Those are actually things where the leaders then start to simplify together. And those are things that can take multiple years over time. Those are the things you usually give to McKinsey and consultants, right? But the reason you can't just do that is because people don't see those things. They take time.
Right.
And that's simplicity can be a very big cultural positive shift. And if you wait 3 years for people to see the results of it, you've already lost them.
Right. You need to give them some quick wins and something where they feel some relief more immediately, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. What would be some of the signals that you pick up on when you enter an organization, a new client partner, where you realize that this is going to be one of those, like, we have to first start with buying into the principle of simplicity?
Well, I think if you see high attrition, and then if you look at their employee engagement surveys, there's a few things. One of the things that they rank lowest on would be ability to get things done. And that's a key signal, right? Another one is they're overworked, they're overloaded, their stress levels are high, there's a high level of burnout and employee turnover. So those are all things that are indicative of workload issues. Also, if their cultural perceptions over time go down, it's typically because of workload. So those are the signals that usually start. The other thing is when you ask people what they spend their time doing, if it's in the work of work, that's a problem.
Okay. So those are some of the ways that you pick up on the need to amplify simplicity and really buy into it as a cultural norm.
That's right.
Yeah. So you've talked a lot about questions. I've heard some of your key questions in our time together today. What would you say about why it's so important to ask quality questions? What would be examples of some of those?
Well, one of the biggest ones is questioning why. Have people explain why we do this. Ask a few whys. Why do you do this? Why do you feel you have to? That's one of the biggest questions. The other thing is when you ask someone what is holding them back. So let me give you an example. Like I'll say to leaders, what do you wish you could spend more time on? And they give me a list of things. And then when you ask them, what's stopping you? They get very defensive. It's very, because people, if it was that easy, I would have figured it out. It's my boss, it's obligations. And really what it comes down to is fear, trust, obligation, if it's personal. And we don't realize that too often we become the beast, we create the beast that we become a slave to. So, I use a story about how it took me months to get a new iPhone. Okay. And months. And I would complain about it on the daily to my husband, like, oh God, I had a busy day, but I got to get this phone fixed. And one night he finally looked at me and he's like, let me understand this. You're the CEO. You commute into Grand Central Station every day in New York, where there's one of the largest Apple stores in the world, and your office is right across the street. What is stopping you? And I realized at that moment that the feeling inside of me wasn't, oh, he's right. It was anger. Because I was called out on it. It was like, well, you don't understand. Yeah. I'm so busy. And it was like, well, he's like, who are you waiting to tell you to go get a phone?
Right. Yeah.
So
I mean, that's a great example, right? Because even though you know these principles, you teach it, you help everybody understand how to do this and why it's so important, but you're human and you're in your own.
But that's where you need to take back time, and I particularly say this as a working mom because it is easier said than done. And I did have this conversation with my husband. I said, yeah, but you don't understand. The demands on me are different than the demands on you. And whether it's invisible work or emotional labor, you can argue with me all you want about it. I don't care. I'll tell you, this is my lived experience, which is I have many more demands and I'm the first go-to on things. So that is a 10x difference in terms of how my time is taken from me. And so to do it, and I'm made to feel selfish when I take it back. So those are things, those are my excuses. Those are realities. But what that just made me realize was it wasn't me having to bend over backwards so I could please others. It was, they were going to have to be I'm going to have to put up with them being upset with me. Otherwise I'm never going to get anything done. So that's why I keep saying to people, and especially women, put boundaries on your time. It is not selfish. It is important to do it. right? It's necessary.
Absolutely. And what is a practical way that people can do that?
Well, that's one of the issues, which is we are going to have to start identifying as people what we will say yes to and what we will say no to. And that's very hard because usually what's going to happen, and you have to get okay with it, is someone's feelings are going to get hurt. And you have to decide whose feelings those are okay to be. Like if it's my kids, then that's a little different for me because I don't want to hurt my kids' feelings. My husband might understand, like we would have a conversation about it. But if it's acquaintances or people that really have been very blasé with my time, rather than feeling, oh, I'm bad, I don't want people to be mad about it, what will they think? You know, everyone goes through those machinations. It's getting tough with yourself and realizing, why do you care? Why do you care? You know what I mean? Like they have no problem taking your time. Why is it not okay to take yours back?
Yeah, absolutely. And I learned this from you, Lisa, that you said, we get so offended when people waste our money, but we aren't as offended when people waste our time. And why is that? I mean, why do you think that is?
Because it's not tangible. Right? We think it's renewable. Time is, we're here forever, right? Like you can see a bank account going down, but you don't see the clock running out. And that's different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an eye opener. When I heard you say that one time, I thought, yeah, that's so true. How can I be more protective of it the way I would with other things, other resources?
Yeah, we've got to make time more tangible.
For sure. So last thing is you talk about how change is a choice. And I think what I'm hearing you say is you're really calling us to own it and to recognize that being busy is not a badge of honor. It is a choice that you're making, and how we're investing our time and energy is a choice. And so if we want to simplify, and if we're hearing what you're teaching us and we're saying, gosh, this sounds intriguing, then we have a choice, right? So just help us understand a little bit more.
Yeah. Change is a choice. And, it's kind of like we're the authors of our own story, so to speak. And I will say that, if I was sitting here listening to this, I would have an eye roll at first, right? Easy for you to say change is a choice. I've got, I've got a hard boss. I've got a million deadlines. I've got young kids. I've got, my time isn't my own. But I guess the alternative to that is, no one's waking up in the morning and saying, how can I make your life better? I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. Yeah. And so you've got to decide what is okay to change. And so, to me, as a working mom, it couldn't be anything that would harm my kids. You know what I mean? That just wasn't on the table. Anything that would be detrimental long-term to friends that I cared about, anything that would be detrimental to my career. But it really made me realize who valued my time and who wasted it. So there's a big difference, right? And so once I started looking at all my tasks and I realized who was involved with those tasks and would they do the same for me, it became pretty clear which things I would give up and which ones I would take, which I would keep.
And then do you, what kind of formats do you use? Is this in writing? Do you use like Outlook?
No, well, it's interesting. You can spreadsheet it. Depends on how organized you want to be. You can take your calendar and spreadsheet it and analyze your time. There's lots of ways, there's timekeeping apps. Yeah. There's lots of different ways to do that. I think one of the most effective ways, I have done something called the Artist Way, which prescribes to you, because I'm a writer. Yeah. You should write 3 pages every morning. They're called your morning pages. And I don't do it every day anymore. Because I've been busy, and you will go through times of busy. But the idea is just to write. And when you write with no agenda, right, you don't need an agenda. Stop putting pressure on yourself. Like you got to produce in the morning. You will see what's on your mind and what really is bothering you in your time. And that can help you understand what needs to rise to the top that you need to fix.
Brilliant.
No one's going to fix it for you. So you either got to bring it up and figure out what the issues are. And if you bring it up and the issue is someone's upset about it, someone's not going to change. Well, I guess if it's only important to them, but they don't care about how you feel, that's kind of an indicator, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. That too is data.
Yeah. It's data, and easier said than done, right? This is me at 56 being able to say this now. So
for sure. But it's important to recalibrate and to have those pauses. And like you said, with those weekly time blocks to check in with yourself, or maybe even like a once a week scorecard on these things that you say you want to be doing more of or less of. I think accountability is great if you could find someone in your life that you can check in with. Mm-hmm. So all of these strategies are really smart. And I appreciate you saying that it's easier said than done. And I also appreciate your inspiration and your modeling. So here's a couple of things that I heard you say. There's a whole host of things. So I want people to go to futurethink.com and look at all of your resources in your book and your TED Talk. It'll all be in the show notes. But futurethink.com is the website. You talked about, what do you do with your time? How do you analyze where your time goes and treating that as the precious resource that it is? And then you talked about how to redistribute your time. What are the things that are worthy of it, and how can we think about what our assumptions are and then reverse those assumptions, think differently about how we organize ourselves. Right. The kill a stupid rule. If no one got anything out of what we talked about today, we want them to know it's gold. Like, what are the rules that they may not have even recognized were rules? And then which stupid ones are we going to kill? Take time to think. That's another key takeaway. I really want all of our listeners to secure time, preferably on a weekly basis, just to think. And then I love the question of list what you wish you could spend your time on, and then why aren't you? Right? So just that reality of putting it out there, stop wishing for it and make it happen. Is there anything else you would want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
No, because we need to keep it simple. Those are great right there. If people would do those, that's enough.
That would be enough. Thank you for your thought leadership and for helping us reach our potential. I so appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you too. Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G. Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.